Today I'm going to be presenting to you a study entitled Payment for Sex in a Macaque Mating Market, authored by Michael D. Gumbert in 2007 from Hiram College in Ohio. In order to understand the motivation of this paper, first you have to understand a little bit about grooming. Grooming is a behavior in primates that is used to pick ticks, lice, and other undesirables off of the fur of monkeys. This is a picture of grooming. Additionally, it is a very social activity, and monkeys have been known to trade grooming for intangibles, such as access to feeding sites, mating sites, water, reduced aggression, and also other time-matched grooming. Because of this, grooming has been modeled as a rudimentary universal currency in primates. This researcher in particular wanted to know if monkeys also trade grooming for sex. This was a behavior that had not been documented before, and he was interested in drawing a parallel between human and primate prostitution-like behavior. Additionally, around the time this study came out, the book Freakonomics was also released. And I don't know if any of you have read it, but inside it is the parable of Keith Chen, who was a monkey researcher at Yale. And the story goes that he introduced coins to pay for food into the monkey enclosure, and immediately the males started trading those coins for sex. Now, what happened is actually he only saw this behavior once, and although like Newsweek, Time, everyone reported on it, it wasn't actually a scientific fact. Therefore, another reason for this research was to actually dispel some misconceptions that surround the area. And evolutionarily, we wanted to know, or he wanted to know, if prostitution was a conserved behavior among primates. If there is primate prostitution, the researcher decided that three hypotheses would be borne out in the data. The first is that males should preferentially mate with females who are sexually available, something he defined as having had sex in the past 3 days. They should do it more often, they should do it for longer. The act of grooming itself should actually increase the female's receptivity to mating, and specifically it should increase the receptivity to mating to that specific male that was grooming her. Finally, the frequency of grooming should be related, and duration of grooming should be related to the dominance rank of the male, such that lower ranked males should have to groom for longer in order to achieve the same sexual outcome as the higher ranked males. The data collection of the study was actually very extensive. Two researchers spent 5 days a week for 2 years in Indonesia following a troop of 48 to 53 macaques, varied throughout the study, seeing all of the male-to-female grooming interactions that they could. When they saw these interactions, they recorded the dominance rank of the male, whether there was a sexual outcome, the male-to-female ratio, which is how many males and females there were in the immediate vicinity that the monkeys could see, and finally, if the female was sexually receptive. They compared these to baseline grooming rates, baseline mating rates, which was how often the females mated with males when they weren't being groomed. The dominance rank was done with the Spearman rank correlation, which is very typical for this sort of study. The results were as follows. 89% of all male-to-female grooming interactions were directed towards females that were sexually receptive, that is, they had sex in the past 3 days. Additionally, 57% of these grooming interactions led directly to sexual behavior. That was in the next half an hour after grooming. And finally, grooming associated with sexual behavior actually was very statistically significantly longer than grooming related to non-sexual behavior. So the time went down from about 550 to 350 seconds. Two-tailed t-test, the probability was 0.029. Moreover, this graph shows that grooming actually makes females more sexually receptive to the males. This is a really interesting graph, so if any of you don't get it, please let me know, because I really want to explain it well. On the left here, we have the mean rate of sexual activity in acts per hour of the female, and 3 treatment groups. The first one is baseline, so when no grooming has taken place, how often do females mate? Here it's 1.5 times per hour. The middle is after grooming, how often do females mate with the partner that groomed them? That goes up to almost 3.5 times per hour. That is a very statistically significant result. And finally, after grooming, how often do the females go and mate with a third party? That is, females are groomed by male A, and then they go mate with male B, C, or D, or E. Actually, there were 5 males in this study. And it turns out that after grooming, the females are more sexually receptive, as shown by the partner graph here, but they were only more sexually receptive to the partner that was grooming them. They were not more sexually receptive in general. which is something you would expect to see if both of those columns were the same and it were just a hormonal response as opposed to an exchange of sorts. Additionally, rank was correlated in that lower ranked males had to groom for longer than the higher ranked male. Each one of these data points represents one of the monkeys in the study. There were only 5 again. So it went from 8 minutes to approximately 12. P-value 0.037. Also, the most statistically significant result was actually the sex ratio. So with a p-value of 0.004, when there was more competition for mates, the males had to groom for longer. So if you look here, this is a graph with mean grooming duration in minutes, and females per male on the bottom. I actually like to flip that around and look at it as males per female. So a low female per male corresponds to a high male per female, which is high competition, and it means the males have to actually groom for longer. Conversely, when there's low males per female, there's not as much competition, they don't have to groom for as long. This is very supply and demand. So what does this tell us? Well, this tells us that males that aren't actually very sexually wanted by the females can improve their chances of mating just by grooming. This is actually a way of addressing the sexual gender disparity, the sexual willingness gender disparity. Because of obligate parental investment, with females having much more than males, females have a willingness to mate that is much below that of males. Now, when you have this disparity, if the males can actually compensate the females with non-sexual acts for sexual acts, you can actually bring that into parity. And that's exactly what's happening here. So all 3 of the hypotheses were confirmed. But what exactly does that mean? Does grooming itself actually constitute payment for sex? Is that really prostitution in a monkey model? Why is it different than, say, other mating behaviors such as yelling, beating on the chest, or dominant strategies? Actually, this is something that's not even as clear-cut in humans as you would think. It's very common to see money being exchanged for sex, which is clearly prostitution. But what if a man gives a woman a bracelet, or a necklace, or a dinner, or a massage, or grooming? You don't know. So that was one of the shortcomings of the study. They didn't really address that. Additionally, in the previous graph, when I showed you that the partner mating rate was much higher after grooming, that was only with males, and they didn't really address if that was just because the male happened to be there grooming the female, and the female was more sexually receptive. And what they could have done is included a female-to-female grooming group, which would have eliminated that to see if grooming itself made females more sexually receptive in general. Finally, 89% of what? I mentioned before that 89% of all male-to-female grooming interactions were directed at sexually available females. However, the authors of the study did not say what percentage of the time each female was sexually receptive. If it were 89%, it wouldn't be a very big deal at all. So the conclusions we can draw from the study are that prostitution may actually be an inevitability of this gap and the ability to exchange goods for sex. Possibly any species that shows this ability and has a sexual disparity in sexual willingness will display prostitution. Certainly this evidence points to it. From previous studies, we know grooming can be modeled as a currency and as a traded commodity in macaques. And so the fact that they're trading it for sex and that the price is modulated by market forces shows us that there is prostitution-like behavior going on in macaques. This is important evolutionarily because it can help us identify how the human phenomenon of prostitution started, what animal first had it, and maybe that can also help us inform our decisions on legalization of sexual prostitution now. Thank you very much.